Welcome back to another episode of Sembrando Ideales. I'm Genesis, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Ali, Guillermo, Rebecca, Mikey, and Dr. Carlos. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about socialism. We have a bunch of questions lined up for Dr. Carlos that we're going to answer about misconceptions and just like a basic introduction to socialism to start.
How's it going, everybody? How's everybody doing?
Doing good. Hanging on there.
Yeah.
Tired. Ready for finals to be over. This is it. This is it. You know, the culmination of all this hard work and progress. I'm not ready for the real adult world just yet, but I guess that doesn't really matter, huh?
You never really are. I'm 40 years old and I'm still not ready for it.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess we can just kind of jump right into it. So I feel like the purpose of this is to kind of clarify our stance on our understandings of what socialism, communism, democratic socialism, what that means to us, because they can have a lot of different definitions based on who you're talking to. So this is a clarification for our listeners to kind of understand where we're coming from and what perspective what framework we're analyzing all of these terms under. Obviously under the guidance of our wonderful Dr. Carlos here. So I will start off. What do you define socialism to be?
I mean, a simple definition of socialism is where everybody sort of works and puts in puts in the fruit of their labor, and we share the wealth that is created. That's sort of a simple definition. If you want to get historical, socialism really comes out of sort of the development of capitalism, and actually the social sciences originally come out of the sort of the history of critique. So Marx in the 1800s, the mid 1800s, he was basically analyzing society. So the dude was like, he's posted up and just kind of observing the world as it was changing around him. And as he was observing this, he developed what's referred to as sort of the dialectical materialism, and trying to really it's his method for social analysis. And basically, dialectical materialism is this, it sounds complicated, but what it is, he says that history always moves forward, and that there's always sort of a dyad of systems, and those dyad of systems basically like fight each other out, and out of that struggle comes a new system. And so, for instance, out of feudalism, capitalism was kind of born out of that, and then them two fought it out, and out of that sort of liberal democracy kind of comes out of that. But basically, capitalism wins over, and it wasn't capitalism; it was mercantilism. So feudalism existed, and then mercantilism sort of grows out of that. Those two things fight it out, and capitalism is born. And so in his conception of how the world was going to sort of function, and I don't never want to say that he prophesized. People do that shit all the time, and it fucking pisses me off. That, Marx prophesied this, and Marx said that this was going to happen. That fool was not fucking Nostradamus. Let's start that shit out. This dude was a legitimate social scientist who observed the world, and he said, look, here are the contradictions that in my observations I can point out that exist currently. He never said anything about the future. He never said this is what's going to happen. He said, but given this context, these are the possibilities. Because if he was somebody who prophesied stuff, he wouldn't have spent the majority of his life actually trying to organize workers. If you recognize that after he went through his philosophical sort of period, his early period, he became much more into political. He got much more into political economy. And so that means that he cared about changing the structure. And so one of you mentioned the Communist Manifesto. I mean, the manifesto was expressly, and actually this is the reason I don't assign it, was expressly written to evoke emotions into the heart of working people, so they can rise up and rebel against their, the landed elite, the petty bourgeois, and the manufacturing class. And so anyway, so back to the story. So you have this sort of dialectical method, right? So capitalism wins out eventually. But in socialism was basically supposed to be the system that basically confronted capitalism And out of that struggle between socialism and capitalism, like communism is supposed to be born. And he never really actually defined communism. It was actually Lenin in State and Revolution that really gives the only like, and there is actually no good definition of communism. So when people say, have we ever had communism in the world, we can honestly say no, that we haven't. The Soviet Union wasn't a communist country, even though it was ideologically communist. It wasn't a communist in praxis. And Cuba's not technically a communist country in praxis. And so people are like, well, what is communism supposed to be? And I'm going to give you a really, really shitty answer to that, because communism is supposed to be about like how communities come together and decide to run their society collectively. And I can't give you that definition because people have to define that for themselves. So that's a practice of democracy. So the definition that Lenin gives in State and Revolution is, he basically says that, like when socialism wins out, socialism will transition to this thing called communism, and the state will wither away. Basically, like communism is supposed to be a stateless society where like people sort of just take care of each other. Those who can work will work. Those who can't work, for whatever reasons, are still taken care of by the community because they're part of the community. So it would be a much more local system, if I had to like venture to guess. But ultimately, it's up to the people that create the system. And so that was the goal. So we've never actually had that. So, but in terms of socialism, so Marx is analyzing the stuff. And he's basically, he's noticing contradictions or whatever, but it was a completely new way of sort of engaging in academic pursuits. Before Marx, like if you go Hegel backwards, like every single intellectual that we learn about in Western sort of thought, what are they talking about? Like if you're talking about Plato, if you're talking about Socrates, if you're talking about Aristotle, if you're talking about, the Roman thinkers, if you're talking about any of those, like what are they all like discussing?
They all try to define justice in a way. So you have like the stories. I mean, I don't really want to explain a whole lot into it the same way you are with Marx, but in a way, they have their own dialectic method of, what is justice? Is it supposed to be equal for everyone? Or, like what?
And so thank you, Mikey. And so in terms of did I cut you off? You're good. Okay.
No, you're good.
Okay, cool. So in terms of that, like, they were thinking about these things, but they were thinking about these things abstractly. So like it was abstract thought, it was ideology, it was the role of ideas. And so these people were all focused on ideas. Marx comes like around eventually to recognize that it's not actually the role of ideas that is like, he's not, and it's not, I'm not saying that he doesn't think it's not important, but like it's not that ideas don't matter. It's actually the opposite. And he flips sort of the Hegelian dialectic on its head, and he's like, hey, it's not ideas, it's actually the material conditions of life that matter. And the material conditions of life are actually what can help construct people's ideas. And so, and then he has a whole, he writes, his whole life really is about the material conditions of life. And so this new way of actually analyzing the world, which we now come to term social sciences, was initially the first name that was given to like people who understood and wanted to see the world this way, to analyze the world this way, is basically rooted in socialism. So like the first name for this way of viewing the world was called socialism, because it's like you're studying society itself, not the ideas of society. And so socialism initially is not even an ideology. It's just like a form of trying to like understand the context of the world and how it works. And so eventually it splits off, like, like in social sciences are born. A lot of people don't even give Marx credit for that, but he's basically the founder of the social sciences. He doesn't even get credit for a tidbit I like to note is that, the way that y'all say it is like, when you want evidence, what does your generation say that you got to bring?
Precedent?
Well, I mean, that's how you say it officially in court, but I want to know what's the like layman's terms of saying that.
Receipts.
You got to bring the receipts. And Marx was the first one to bring the receipts. Like he was the first one ever to actually cite his work, because he knew that people were going to be like, you're full of shit, you're making this up. And he's like, nah, I got this information from these archives. I got this information from the health archives of these hospitals over here. And so a small tidbit for you is that Marx actually invented citations. And that's why you got to bring receipts now when you write papers. So anyway, socialism starts out as that. And so in the context of ideology, socialism is supposed to be, as a system, is supposed to be really a transitory stage between capitalism and sort of this stateless society that exists, that hopefully will exist one day. But as a system, it's basically like, imagine all the work that we do, and imagine all of the billions of dollars in profits that are made in our society. Imagine that money staying with the people and the people deciding what to do with it. That's essentially what socialism is, where, we are creating wealth. The people that work, and some of the people who can't don't, are elderly, are differently abled population, children, anyone you sort of want to include in that, people who are, like, for some reason they're not able to work because they're sick or whatever. And like the people who are working, there's more than enough wealth to actually take care of everybody. And so socialism is basically a system where we use the state to do that. And eventually it was supposed to turn into communalism. I mean, technically, like, this is where you also get into the differences between the different segments of the left, where you get into like anarchists and anarchist syndicalists, anarcho-communists. Like, it's all, I don't want to sort of, because a lot of those people get lost in the technicalities. But really the point of socialism is we're all working really hard. Why should the billions of dollars in profit go to people who don't do anything? And why can't we use that money to just take care of the people in our society?
I was about to ask you, since you were saying like the different technicalities on the left, what's the difference between socialism and democratic socialism?
So anarcho-Bidenist, yeah, that's a new thing. Like the Biden is socialist. Like, people are fucking saying that Biden and Kamala Harris are socialist. Like, it makes me angry. And this is part of that story, Guillermo. It's part of your question. So like in terms of what's the difference, I would say that the democratic socialists aren't really looking for the end of the state. Like, they're just trying to use the state as a mechanism to distribute wealth, particularly because it's our tax dollars, right? Like, people hear, wealth distribution, they get mad because they think that they're coming for your money. Like, and this has to do with one of the sort of Marx maxims is that, he's, early on in his career, he said, those that control the means of material production control the means of mental production. Because they get to own the mass media. Basically, they have the money and wealth to spend on owning the corporations that own the actual media, so corporate media. They can own the newspapers, and they basically can tell any stories. And one of the things that's happened in this country is, for a long time, especially after the Cold War, is essentially that this country is deadly afraid of the word socialism, and nobody knows what it means. And so you will hear people in my family, people in the community, you say the word socialism and they get fucking scared because they assume it's the boogeyman that's going to come and take them in the night.
That's my parents. Like, I've always tried to slide in the question oh, what do you guys think about Hugo Chavez? What do you guys think about this? What do you guys think about socialism? And they're like, oh, eres comunista, okay.
Yeah. And so communism and socialism, because they're used confoundedly in our society, and people are deathly afraid of those terms. But I the first thing I ever tell my students or tell anybody who asks me this question is, well, when people ask you that question, why don't you put it back on them and ask them, what is socialism? Ask them to define it, and I guarantee you they won't be able to. Because
my brother was saying, oh, do you know that communism? Just because I said that, I was like, oh, what are your beliefs? And I said I'm leaning towards democratic socialism. And he's like, do you know that communism has killed a number of people?
Yeah.
And I was like, do you know capitalism has killed how many people capitalism has killed?
Yeah. And you know that figure that they come up with is always false because they include the Nazis in there. The Nazis weren't communist or socialist. So like in the practical sense, even though their name it was in their name, that's that's like me calling myself the White Panther or some shit. I'm not white, like I'm even though I'm Mexican, I'm not, like in terms of my race, like I'm technically not. It's it's all right. You can let your dog come in. Like our viewers want to see doggies. They like doggies and cats. Doggies more than cats, but I'm not either. Anyway, so back to sort of your question. So democratic socialism is basically actually it's basically actually a redundancy. Like it's what do you call that when like it's not a paradox. That's when you have an opposite, but it's basically redundant. Because one of the things that people always misquote Marx all the fucking time, and it pisses me off. One of the ways that they misquote Marx is that Marx talked about the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? And like that sounds bad because it has the word dictatorship in it, right? Like, oh, what the fuck? What does that mean? But think about it. Think about it logically. Like, if the proletariat rule, who makes up the proletariat?
Working class?
How many people is that?
Like millions, if not billions.
Is it the majority of the people on Earth?
I would say it's more than the bourgeois.
So if it's it's the majority of the people on Earth, right? And it's more than the bourgeois. What do we call that when the majority rules?
Democracy.
We call it democracy. So when Marx said, and he was talking about the dictatorship of the proletariat, he was actually being facetious. Like he was actually like being sarcastic. And that's another thing that people don't recognize. And it's hard to pick that up because I don't personally know this guy. You don't personally know this guy. So if you pick up his book that he wrote 150 years ago, you're gonna be like, you're not gonna know that that's his character, right? If you read him enough, and if you read enough of like the stories about him, you will come to recognize that he had a personality just like everybody else has a personality. And the dude was sarcastic as fuck, but he was extremely well read. And so he was one of like, if you read Karl Marx, I mean the Capital, I actually have it right here. Like this is the version that I think people should read. It's this version. And I think it's the International Publishers. I think they have the best translations of his work, to be honest with you. It's really hard to translate like German to English, and like a lot of stuff gets lost in translation, but I think they have the best. I don't understand German, but like I've read things that are translated by different people, and I've read the same stuff by different in different translations, in English translations, and the International Publishers it has more meaning in it. Like I'll give you an example. In other books, people talk about the word alienation, and when people think about alienation, they think about their feelings and their being, feeling of being like separated from society. That's not what Marx was referring to. He was actually talking about the estrangement of labor, and that's how it sort of defines that. But anyway, back to I get off topic easily, especially when I'm talking about socialism. So the difference between democratic socialism and socialism is technically a redundancy that is necessitated by the fear that people have in this country. So the word democratic is put there on purpose so that people can recognize that, socialism is meant to be democratic. And it's also a reminder from what happened in the 1960s and 70s, because socialism became not democratic. It became authoritarian. And so it's to separate itself from the authoritarian forms of socialism that developed in the Soviet Union and Cuba and in other sort of Africa. But then people people will lambast that authoritarianism, not recognizing that to some degree that authoritarianism was necessitated by capitalist wars. So, y'all learn about World War I and World War II and going through college, but what you don't learn about what actually ended World War I was that the Soviet Union Russia pulled out because the Bolsheviks had taken power and they were going to start their communist project. And all the other countries who were fighting against each other basically stopped the war and said, hey, we can't let this happen. And they joined forces and marched on Moscow. And so Lenin, after having taken the Winter Palace, and this is where you get the story, like you get like the propaganda comes through like fucking children's movies. Y'all ever see this movie Anastasia? Like, the reason the royal family had to flee was because of this. Well, the real story was the reason that the royal family had to flee was because like the Tsar had fucking impoverished his whole community. Like the peasants were dying of poverty, they were dying of hunger in his. So when people talk about, like, back to your question, Guillermo, when people talk about like how communism has killed a bunch of people, like, dude, capitalism and colonialism has killed like fucking astronomical numbers more than
Christopher Columbus genocide.
World War II was technically a capitalist war. So anybody that died under that war was technically dying because of capitalism. And even also like that's another thing that people don't recognize is that, like, oh, communism kills people during war. Capitalism kills people like under normal circumstances, and we don't count those deaths. Right. So like the people that die of homelessness, the people that die of like not being able to afford healthcare, the people that can't, that like they can never sort of, get an MRI. So they never know they have, like a small tumor that develops into like a large tumor. And then it becomes a, malignant tumor, and then it turns into cancer. Like there's, millions of people in the world that die because capitalism doesn't give them the resources they need to survive the hellscape that capitalism is. I mean, shit, right now, how many people are dying in India because we won't fucking lift the patent on the Pfizer vaccine, and we don't blame capitalism because it's sort of like like that's because we rather protect profit in this country than to like actually help people. So democratic socialism is just a sort of a new way to try to interpret this concept of like, hey, our tax dollars should go to helping our people. That's really the simple version of it. You're paying into a system of taxes, and what are you getting back? Like, what's your, if you think about taxes as a return, as an investment, what's your return on investment? If you were buying stock in a company, you would care about what your returns are. And in our system, we pay way more taxes than we ever see back in a return, because that shit is used for military weaponry. That shit is, $800 billion military budget. And then newspapers and the media come out and say, oh, it's going to cost $20 billion to eradicate student loans, like as if we're not spending $800 billion on like developing new fucking like planes that don't ever fucking run. Like that's the stuff that's crazy. So to simplify it, basically socialism is a social system in which, the social surplus product is not extracted as profit and goes to people's pockets. It goes back to the people. The people get to decide what to do with it. And that's why, honestly, there's no definition for communism, because it's got to be something that's democratically decided by, and not even democratically decided by the whole country, democratically decided in the regions by different people in their locations. It's contextual. So I like to talk about communism not as an ism, but communism as a plural, communisms, because it's going to be different in different locations depending on what people need. Sorry, I can go on. Bread made out of sawdust, yeah.
What do you are Bernie Sanders and AOC actually socialists?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they are, and I think honestly they've done a masterful job, a better job than anyone historically has ever done. To actually be able to popularize socialist ideas, and that's honestly why you're getting the sort of the blowback. Like whenever there's any gains that are made, there's always people who are reactionary and they want to fight that. And so the reason that they're accusing Biden and Kamala Harris of being socialists is because they're trying to denigrate this concept of socialism. And so I do think that they're socialists, but also I don't think that they're the most, if you had to put people on a scale of whether they're, like what percent socialism they are, I think they're maybe somewhere between 50 and 60%. But I also understand that they understand the context. Like if you think about this, as Gramsci talked about, as a war of position, they understand that in the current context, they can't openly call, for a socialist revolution or whatever. So they're going to try and pass policies that get us in that direction. And I mean, technically, it's not any different than like, welfare reforms, right? Like the welfare state. And it's basically using the power of the state to use state dollars, which are taxpayer dollars, to help taxpayers. And I think, honestly, they're masterful at the way that they do it. And there's a lot of people that on the left who talk shit about them. They're like, oh, they're not really socialist because of this or that. And it's like a lot of that is virtue signaling. Like people are just trying to make a name for themselves as influencers or as people like whoever they are, just to show how down they are. And I remember ever since I got into sort of activism roles, there was always those people who always like wanted to like appear and perform that they were the downest. And then the people who were actually the downest were the people who stayed after to fucking clean up. Like not the people who like screamed the loudest, not the people who dressed or performed the activism. I remember dudes looking like the Brown Panthers talking all kinds of shit. I'm like, dude, but you don't do nothing. And so I think they're in that struggle right now. I think that, Bernie and they're trying to build out a movement that like, one, we don't have the numbers. If you sort of like read Gramsci, he talks about, he uses a lot of war analogies because he's writing in prison during World War II because he's imprisoned by Mussolini. And so he's using war analogies to get all his stuff through the censors. But like, if you think about it as that analogy of war opposition, like we don't have the numbers to actually like, not elect Democrats. Like we don't. People are, oh, Green Party, man, the last time the Green Party like had a serious campaign where it actually seemed reasonable that, people should vote for the third party, like was when what's that dude's name when he ran against Bush, and I forget who ran for the Democrats. Oh, Al Gore, and he didn't even get 3%. So how do you like logically in the United States where you have a two-party rule, and I'm not saying that you should vote for the Democrats, but I'm saying like, look, we just don't have the numbers. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the the political army, so to speak, not, like not violent army, but the political army to actually take on what's currently happening. And they're building that shit out. It started with AOC, started with Bernie, then AOC ran, and then she expanded it into the squad. And now the squad is getting bigger. Now it's like Jamal Bowman and all these other people running for office on a local level, state level, national level. The Arizona DSA members and part of the Our Revolution slate just took over the state party. Like, and so it's, like, you also understand the context. Like you gotta build numbers. And it can't. And this is the part where I think the DSA, since we're talking about socialism, DSA is going to have to do a much better job, and not just DSA, unions, anybody trying to do any kind of political organizing in this country is going to have to do a much better job organizing Latinos, and particularly Mexican Americans. And I say Mexican Americans because they're like by far the largest contingent of the Latino community. And so, like, the reason that, a lot of people say it was African-American folks, and for sure it was African-American folks turning out in Georgia, African-American folks turning out in Philly, but like it was also brown people turning out in Arizona. It's also brown people. You know what percentage of brown people who were eligible to vote voted in Wisconsin? 80% of eligible Latinos voted in Wisconsin. That's fucking massive turnout. And so, like, and that's cool. That's all well and good for one election. But how do you keep those people engaged? How do you get those people active in your sort of movements? But anyway, now I'm talking about strategy and organizing. Y'all want to talk about more socialism?
Yeah. Another question that we had for you was, oh my God, I hope you can't hear that in the background.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. Another question that we had about socialism is, why are Americans so afraid of socialism, despite the fact that we have certain programs in our country that are socialist, like free education, social security, even firefighters?
And technically even police, like, even though, you all know how I feel about that. I think because they don't understand what it is. They think it's funny. I love that there's a bunch of memes and pages about, have you ever heard somebody try to define socialism, but they just define capitalism? Like, giving people to people who don't work for it. Well, technically owners don't don't work for it. Stockholders don't do any work. So you say, well, Jeff Bezos does some work because he was the CEO of his company. All right, he worked maybe some 9 to 5 hours, right? But not enough to fucking make up for $30 billion. But like all his stockholders, they literally are not doing anything, zero to benefit like Amazon outside of just owning the stock, and they're getting all the returns. And so I think it goes back to the idea is, one, we're not ever able to sort of define what capitalism is and isn't. And this is one of the things that I think is changing, which I think is beautiful. And I think this is where Bernie and AOC and like a lot of other people have like done a much better job at sort of explaining what it is and what it isn't. But, because they control the media outlets, don't ever teach you really anything about systems. They say, this person died, and they say, oh, this puppy got saved, and that's all they tell you about. They don't, they're not out there sort of reporting, in terms of the economy, even. We only report the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We don't ever report the homelessness rate. We don't ever report the joblessness rate. The unemployment rate isn't even real. Like, the unemployment rate doesn't even count a shit ton of other people that get left out. Like, if you're not actively looking for a job, you're actually not considered unemployed. You're just considered like sort of extra. The prison population isn't considered as part of the unemployment rate. So if you factor all those things in, the unemployment rate would be somewhere near 20% to 25%. And so I think, this country has done a lot of really good work, not good work, but like it's really good at doing this work of using propaganda and psyops to convince people that socialism is a bad thing without them even understanding what it is. If you want a perfect example, you mentioned it, like public education is a perfect example of socialism. Like, we're all pitching in for it, and everybody gets the benefit. This post office is my personal favorite, because who's got shit to say anything about the post office? Like, and this is where you get into the cops. So like, oh, cops do a dangerous job. Man, post office workers go into those same communities every single day on foot, in person, not behind some car that is barricaded, not, they can't drive, they're walking around those neighborhoods and nothing ever happens to them. Why? Because they're not harassing people in that community. And so I have mad props, because I think the post office workers have a much more dangerous job than police officers. I don't know if I answered your question, but a lot of it has to do with sort of just propaganda, man.
Yeah, talking about propaganda, do you think the American media has succeeded or failed in presenting Latin American socialism as a failure?
That has a lot of double negatives in that question. So the U.S. media, because it's owned by corporations who benefit off of like the exploitation of resources in Latin American countries, obviously will not paint any, like, it has a, I don't even want to say like it's a liberal or leftist or rightist slant. It has a pro-corporate slant in those countries. So for instance, when Bolivia was Bolivia in the last couple of, last 2 years has undergone a lot of turmoil, and the media never covered like that. A lot of that stuff had to do with the lithium mines that they found. If we want to go to a green energy, and this is why I think sometimes even green energy is greenwash, right? Elon Musk, like, oh, everybody should be driving a hybrid car or like a, electric car. Yeah. You know what electric cars use for power?
Lithium-ion batteries.
They use batteries. And y'all know what happens to do batteries last forever? No. So what happens to the batteries after they're no longer good? They got to get stored somewhere. So where are you going to put them? You're going to put them the same place you're putting toxic waste. You're like, it is toxic waste at that point. Have y'all ever seen like a car battery, like just, just sit around and like it deteriorates? It like burns a hole through like the actual battery piece and starts melting onto the floor. It's super toxic. I mean, here in LA, the Exide plant, was sued, and like the city of Maywood and the surrounding communities in Southeast LA were able to sort of get some money. I think they won a case against Exide. Exide makes batteries because of how toxic that shit is. And people don't think about that. They think about like clouds in the air and, like, driving, like sustainable cars. Like ultimately cars are not sustainable. If you really want to move to sustainability, you got to start biking more. And the thing is, we don't build an infrastructure in the society to help that. In LA, I don't understand why we're still building out freeways. Recently, the 710 freeway was actually the city wanted to expand it, and communities actually won a case that is going to prevent the expansion of the freeway. All those freeways, literally, for me, should be turned into subways. Like, like the 105 is the only one, but imagine if every single freeway had, you dedicate 2 lanes on each side for just one metro to go up and down that. Like people still can get to where they need to go. And, again, it doesn't reduce it. It's still based on electricity, and how are you getting the electricity? We need more solar. We need all kinds of different forms, wind power. And, people this is another thing, is that it's really easy to be critical of things. And so that's why I think a lot of people fall for stupid, excuses or reasons. Like, when Trump was talking about solar and wind energies, oh no, it was killing the birds. I remember what he said about wind turbines, but he said some stupid ass shit, and people fall for it because it's easy to have a defensive position.
You were just talking about Elon Musk and Tesla and the lithium in Bolivia, and I think that's a really good kind of segue to talk a little bit more about Latin America, because on Twitter, Elon Musk made some comments that he wouldn't be opposed to a coup in Bolivia if that meant that he had more access to lithium and those lithium mines.
You're saying it very nicely. He said this. I'm gonna quote him. He said, "We'll coup whoever we want," and the reality is he's not wrong, because we have and we did and we will. And I'm not saying we should, but if you look at the history of Latin America, it's sad because it's a history. Technically it's almost two continents, full of rich cultures, indigenous cultures, rich histories, so much diversity in food and, people and culture and resources. And yet it's basically been the US's version of a colony. It's starting with Mexico. Like, I like to think of the Mexican-American War as the first war where the United States was basically expanding into an empire. And if you think about it in that context, like what we did in Iraq, you understand that the same thing we did in Iraq, well, that started with Mexico. Like, basically, the Mexican-American War was about taking resources away from Mexico, specifically mining resources in the Southwest. And it's basically become, it's where we get our raw materials from. It's where we get all our cheap labor from. It's where all the sweatshops are at. It's where, we get people in the global South to basically do all of the work necessary for capitalism to thrive. And the history of, Latin America is that, beginning with Mexico, but then eventually with, the technically it was the Spanish American War, where they took Cuba and they took the Philippines, and then it sort of continued with, Jacobo Arbenz, was it 1950s, and then everybody knows of Allende in 73 in Chile. But there was a lot of other countries that we don't know about, and it's everywhere. And it happened in Iran. It was happening all over the world. Get into the Mossadegh government in Iran, get into how we funded the CIA. The CIA funded Al-Qaeda before it was Al-Qaeda, to destabilize the Soviet Union. And then they were on the CIA. They were on the payroll, the CIA payroll, when Bush was head of the CIA. But all of it is because of corporate profit and corporate greed. And so, and that's why people are fighting for socialism, because, why are we using all of these massive amounts of resources to destroy the planet when we can use them to actually help people? I was watching some commercial, and it was I think they're sending in the first civilian space flight. The first civilians are going to go up into space. It's going to be called Inspire 4. And I just think about the millions and billions of dollars that are going to be spent to try to get to Mars. And people are like, oh, we want to explore the universe to see, what, great things are out there. Well, can we explore, our workplaces to see how we can make those better? Pay workers better? It's, sorry, I'm just ranting.
That kind of tied in with last episodes where Benito was like, can't we just have healthcare?
Yeah.
Like, can't we just have these other things that will fix here instead of spending the millions or billions amount of dollars outside of the planet? Like, and that ties in also too with like the contradictions and you know how CIA is pulling strings. Like they put
Dude,
cells to have Hugo Chavez get cancer in his underwear.
there was actively, so this has been declassified. There was actively that I know of, I think it was 600 different plans to kill Fidel Castro.
In the funniest ways possible.
And some of
Like,
those were fucking stupid. Like they were the stupidest thing. So I was thinking about this because I was watching some 1980s movies about like CIA doing some shit, and it's actually funny because it's relevant to this. And so Tom Hanks, they think that he's some kind of spy, and so the CIA is like following him around town. And I'm thinking about like, think about the resources that they're wasting following this guy who's not a spy. They just think he's a spy, and they're tapping his phone, and they're going into his house, and they're wasting all kinds of money. People got paid, Genesis, to come up with that shit. Like imagine being somebody who's in a room and say, yeah, maybe we can kill him with, putting some cancer cells in his underwear.
I think there was one that was like an exploding cigar.
Yeah, that's funny because they had an exploding cigar in that movie. And like it's, that's what we do. And this reminds me of the CIA commercial. Did y'all see that? Did y'all read about that? The CIA has a commercial about how intersectional it is and how like it's basically a woke CIA. And so some people are losing their shit because everybody's like talking shit about critical race theory, or like like they're like up in arms that people are teaching it. And so people are mad that the CIA is basically like doing that. But those people don't recognize that the CIA has actually always done that. Do you know? Did you all know that the CIA was the first federal bureaucracy in the 1950s to beg for affirmative action programs? Did y'all know that? Why do you think the CIA would want affirmative action programs? Just think through it logically. What does the CIA do, and where does it do it? Anybody? Well, I mean, we're talking about Latin America. What is it? Like, what do the people look like in Latin America?
It's like a multiracial society.
What do people look like in Africa?
I mean, multiracial too. I mean, like a lot of people think. Well, I mean, we've been socialized to believe that like everybody who lives in Africa is black, which is not true.
Yeah, but like most people, it's okay to say most people that live in Africa are black.
I know, but like
they're different shades of black. But the point I'm trying to make is, okay, if you have all white spies and they're hanging out in Africa, if you don't have people of color spies, and your spies need to go to Africa to do some shady shit, like what's gonna happen to them when they get over there?
I mean,
They'll be picked up right away.
Allie?
I'm just gonna say they're gonna get spotted.
They're gonna get spotted, like you and Mikey said. Basically, they're gonna get picked up. People are gonna know who are these fucking guys sticking out like a sore thumb. And I say guys because in the 1950s, it was mostly dudes. And so they were like, no, we need people of color spies because we need people to blend in. But you're right, Rebecca. I don't want to sort of discount your comment. It's like obviously there's a history of colonization in Africa that has left a lot of white population in sort of Algeria is an example of that. The French took over them, and then South Africa, where the British still have large white populations there. But largely, like the CIA was like, hey, like we need folks of color to go fucking destroy other countries and their sovereignty.
Kind of like School of the Americas. Sorry.
School of
yeah.
Well, the School of the Americas is different because like we're not sending our spies, we're training their spies so that we can wash our hands of it. It's not us. We're gonna give you the weapons, we're gonna teach you how to like murder people in the nastiest ways. So that's why when people say like, oh, like communism is killed, man, like get out of here. Capitalism, the brutality of the Central American wars, the brutality of the shit that happened in Vietnam, the stuff that happened in Cambodia, the stuff that happened all over Southeast Asia, like the fact that there's still bombs, like they're little bombs that haven't been triggered in Vietnam that can still go off, that we left behind 60 years excuse me, 60 years later, like you can talk to me about communism. Get out of here. This turned into like the murderingness of capitalism podcast.
They were delayed bombs on purpose.
No, it's just you sort of leave bombs out there, or like they're cluster bombs, and so cluster bombs are like landmines. So like they only go off when they get set off, and a lot of them didn't get set off back then. And so they're still out there. Like they're like landmines that exist. Basically, people like kind of walk around them. They're very careful, and especially where they know that there is an area that has cluster bombs. But there's actually, if y'all want to look this up, just go to YouTube and click, type in bombies, like, and you can see them. They're like some of the ones that go off. They're basically the size of a baseball, and they're black. But a lot of them didn't get triggered back then, and they're still there. And so sometimes people still like will step on it, and like, the leg is taken off. It won't, like, unless you're right on top of it, it won't kill you. It'll just maim you. But still, that's, you look at the ravages of what capitalism has done around the world is terrible. But back to socialism, because I don't want this to be all about shit talking. One of the things that I think is really important to think about when we talk about socialism is that, and this is one of my frustrations with people on the left, is that like socialism, especially through a sort of a Marxist critique, is really about critiquing capitalism. But that's a first step. The reason you critique capitalism is about trying to understand it, and what are the contradictions, and where are the points of exploitation, so that you can transcend it, so you can build an alternative. And I don't think enough of us on the left do that work. What is that going to look like? What does it look like to, like, it can't just be about talking shit. So like, I think I've said this before on this program. I have I have leftist acquaintances, and they'll say some like really fucking, like, at this point, really basic ass leftist like rhetoric. Like one of the favorites of the left is like, we need to seize the means of production. And then I'll reply. So one time I replied to one of them and I said, okay, I'm with you. How? And he was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, yeah, you're advocating for seizing the means. There's, you wear t-shirts. I've seen you, you bought a t-shirt that says seize the means. How? Are you going to use weapons? Because I'll be honest with you, I tell the dude, you don't look like you're in shape for that, for a drawn out warfare. I'm not in shape for that. Like, fucking, I get winded going up the stairs. So, okay.
Well, how would you, like, what would you say to someone like that, where like they're feeling motivated, they have like the right ideas and intent in regards to wanting to organize more, wanting to learn more? What would you say is the most important first step for somebody to be able to, or like, what do you think is the most important first step for us in order to move towards a more equitable society?
So the first step is to learn how the system works, but it can't stop there, right? Like, so my critique of this sort of commentary is that, like, we can't just be about shit talking capitalism. Like, I'm happy to do it any single day of the year. Like, I love shit talking capitalism. There's so much shit to talk about. There's so much bad shit that it does to people, to to the environment, to animals, to like you human beings, to humanity, to the earth, to even space, dude. Like, so much fucking space trash. But we have to move beyond sort of a reactionary sort of position where all we're doing is reacting to what this thing is doing, and we have to start envisioning a new society. What does that look like? Okay, if we want to seize the means, we're not going to take it over violently, because if you believe in pedagogy of the oppressed, like I believe in pedagogy of the oppressed, we have to humanize the people who are oppressing us, and that's hard to do. Like, I get that. Like, it's there's some people who I don't think actually are worthy of that humanity, but like, long term, we can't just take it from people who have it, because when we take it from them, what are they going to do? They're going to take it back, and we're just going to go back and forth playing fucking hot potato with capital. And so we have to get into like, well, what does it look like to own capital? Well, we got to build capital. Okay, we got to build capital and use it as a tool, not as a sort of like deity. So what that means is we need resources. How are we going to get those resources? We can use city policies to do that. How do we get the city to say, hey, these city properties, you know what, we're going to use them to build affordable housing? because we already have those resources as citizens of a city. You know, or collectively, you know, like this is something the foundation eventually wants to do is, you know, like if enough of us pitch in, you know, $1,000 as an investment, as a, you know, like small return on investment, like investment, you know, if I can get, you know, I every semester I have 270 students. If I can get, you know, 5 years worth of around 500 students per year, 5 years times 500, that's 2,500 students, to pitch in $1,000. That's $2.5 million. Like, and we can use that to actually like buy out land and turn it into nonprofit housing, community land trusts. So part of it is being creative. This is where I think it's important. Like, it is important to understand how terrible capitalism is, but we need to move beyond that. You know, it can't also be institutional change. This is actually, I think, where critical race theory falls short. Critical race theory does an excellent job of telling us what the current situation is for people of color and marginalized communities, but like it focuses a lot on institutions, and ultimately we have to change the social relations of production. And I think that's why Marxist analysis, for me, like go that step further. For me, it's not about just getting more people of color in higher positions of power if those positions of power are oppressive. And so ultimately, if there's young people who want to get involved with people who are doing innovative shit. So like in LA, that's the LA Co-op Lab, the Foundation for Economic Democracy, self-plug there. You know, in Santa Ana, it's Cooperación Santana. There's all kinds of, there's another one out here in LA called Lucy. It's the LA Union Cooperative Initiative. And so like people are basically developing, there's all kinds of land trusts that are popping out in LA because there's Trust South LA. They're trying to like basically take private land off of the for-profit market. And they're basically trying to democratize the economy. And so for me, that's really where the work needs to go. You know, it's not just about graduating from college, because, you know, we've been doing that for 30 to 40 years. And all we have is, you know, more people of color in positions of power. And we have Kamala Harris's of the world ain't doing shit. Okay, so you know she's out there like, and she'll tweet about like Trans Remembrance Day, even though like when she was DA in when she was a DA in San Francisco, she incarcerated them in the trans women. She incarcerated them in the men's prison. So like, ultimately, the socialism is trying to transform the social relations of production, which doesn't in and of itself change the other shit. But that's why I think critical race theory goes well with sort of Marxist theory if you do it right. So again, this is not me sort of discounting, and that's another thing too, is like we operate in a world of binaries. So me saying that if somebody just gets that clip and fucking shortens it, and we do what we do with Marx, which we take his quote out of context, people can be like, Dr. Carlos is anti-critical race theory, which y'all know that I'm not. I just think is limited. I don't know if that answered your question. What do y'all think? Where are y'all at in your understanding of socialism and your politicization? I know that y'all are at different levels, but what do you all think about socialism, since y'all are the new generation? Your generation actually has a different sort of experience with the word that isn't tainted a lot by the negativity of the Cold War. So I mean, I grew up watching fucking Rocky movies, right? Where fucking Rocky went and fought a Cold War. Literally, the movie was a literal fucking analogy for fighting the Cold War against the Soviet Union. And as a kid, I didn't recognize that. I just oh yeah, American, he beat the Russian. And so as a kid, I had all kinds of negative feelings towards Russians and to red commies. And I used to call people commies. I didn't even know what the fuck it meant, because propaganda, movies, cultural things, in everyday life that are slowly, it's not just the news, it's actually much more the cultural stuff. This is where Edward Said talks about cultural imperialism. And so I was socialized in a world where communism was a bad thing, but y'all exist in a different world.
Yeah, I would definitely say that I am not a hater of socialism or communism, because I feel like those terms have been kind of villainized by the older generations, and I just kept hearing in textbooks of how awful it was, but then I would read the actual work of it and I'd be like, that's not lining up. So I never really understood that growing up. And so I always did my own research, like regarding like politics. And I don't know, I don't know what I would consider myself. I'm still kind of, I guess, fine tuning it with more that I learn, but I definitely would say I am a socialist for sure. But like maybe beyond, with other ideologies combined, who knows?
Well, I mean, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You're good. I was just gonna say, for sure, I get the feminist socialist like vibes.
Not white feminism though. We don't stand that.
Never white feminism. Oh
Well, white feminism isn't socialist, so like.
Correct.
There you go. Well, I was just gonna kind of share like my upbringing. I was raised religiously, so with certain values, you grow up thinking the world is a certain way, and then you get to be a certain age, and then you realize it's not. Well, I mean, at least for myself, like the world wasn't what I thought it was growing up. And so one of the most important lessons I think that I was taught and like still abide to this day is treating others the way you want to be treated. And I think that's like an important message that withstands even any like religious ideologies. It's just a
or
general
even,
thing that you do.
Or even
like
political ideologies either.
Yeah, like you want to be able to provide for people the way that you would want to be provided for if you were in those circumstances. So like if I have the ability to provide for somebody when they don't have the same resources or access to resources that I do, by all means, I'm going to share that because that's what I would want if I were in that position. So if, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Because your point like reminds me of, like, I don't, if I had as much money as Jeff Bezos, I just don't understand these people, to be honest with you, because if I had that much money, I would literally be giving that shit away. I would be out everywhere, and not just for like philanthropy giving. I would be in the streets fucking handing like, fucking $20,000 to a homeless person. Like I would be walking through the street. Like, so I don't understand in that same context, like, and that's another thing I think people don't understand because they assume that like, oh, that socialism is going to come take resources away from like working class people and give them to poorer working class people. Like, no, socialism wants to get the resources from the people who have way more than they will ever be able to spend. So we're taking it from, like the super rich. Like I'm not even talking about millionaires. I'm talking about people who have billions and billions of dollars. And I'll say this on air because I think I said it last week, but I'll repeat it. There's a difference between a million and a billion. And in time, 1,000,000 seconds is 11 days. 1,000,000,000 seconds is 31 years. Imagine Jeff Bezos has near $200 billion like of wealth. Like he has way more money than we'll ever need. And like, I just don't understand how, if I had that money, I would literally be on the streets, fucking not even buying people cars. I would be building private fucking rail systems. I would be building like housing everywhere. I would buy out land and say, okay, this shit, like people can live there for free. Sorry, I cut you off, Rebecca. I apologize.
No, I was just like, I mean, I absolutely agree. Like the whole point of amassing all this wealth, I would assume, is to use it for a good purpose. But like, where are you, like, what are you even going to do with the money? Like, you can't even spend all of it in your lifetime. And you have $200 billion for what?
And you're fighting some workers because they want a couple extra dollars to pay. That's the part that I don't get. Like, y'all ever watch like Bond movies and shit? Like, and there's all these villains, and like the villains, like, this is another thing that we do is a lot of those villains end up being like perpetuating Islamophobia, because a lot of the villains are like, Middle Eastern. I'm not even gonna say the word, but like in real life, those villains are literally fucking like capitalists. Like, like, y'all remember Inspector Gadget? There was a guy with a cat and you never saw his face. That is literally Jeff Bezos, like the man behind the fucking, like machine, like making shots and like, calling shots and telling people that they got to be more efficient so they can't go to the restroom and pee.
You have Americans scared of like Mexico, the narcos and stuff like that, but they don't realize that like the DEA has infiltration with them, that the American government is so involved with their system, and that they basically help control the whole narco system. Like it all ties in with capitalism, and like how I don't know how like Americans how capitalism has been able to successfully make it seem like they're so good when in reality they're like the evil person. They're like the devil. They're the devil basically.
So I'm going to tell you how exactly. So one, you villainize anything that's not capitalism, right? You villainize socialism, communism, you villainize it. You also don't ever have like people talk about capitalism, period. It becomes so normalized that it's just the norm. You don't ever say it. And you control, like you have so many resources that you basically use all of them to perpetuate your worldview, a worldview where capitalism is the norm, where making profit is the norm. Like, and so it's one of those things that is normalized in every single everyday life, not through like overt propaganda, but it's through subtle propaganda. I grew up, and there was all these movies, the rags to riches movies, right? How some guy got lucky and he made $1 billion or $1 million and he was really nice and he got the girl, and so you grow up being poor and you want that because you want to get out of your hellscape. And so that's why you have all these people simping for capitalism. Like, that's one of my favorite memes. There's so many people out here like say I'm a capitalist, and I'll be like, where's your capital? Show me. Where's your factory? Where's your means of production? Like, you don't own shit, man. You own a car, and that's it. You work for Uber. Like, you're not a capitalist.
Speaking of propaganda, I want to say one little thing about Marvel that always like gets me. I think that Tony Stark is like the best capitalist propaganda they could have created. He's literally like the Raytheon CEO of the Marvel world. And it like one thing that I was thinking about the other day, which is very specific. If you didn't watch Punisher, then this is not going to make any sense. But in Punisher, the show, they talk about how the US military was using the bodies of these like Middle Eastern people that they were killing to like traffic drugs. And I'm just saying, like, how does this exist in the same universe where Tony Stark is creating the weapons that they're using?
Yeah.
I
mean, technically, I love Batman just as growing up, but even Batman, I know that's DC Comics, but like Batman's another one. These, instead of we can do a whole show on if you all want to do it, like a follow-up show on just like comic books and how they perpetuate American normalcy. Bit like Wayne Tech, like a lot of that same weaponry, and instead of actually helping poor people, that was beating the shit out of like poor people, and that drives them so crazy they turn into the Joker.
He could do something good with the money that he has, but he chooses to go and do like this vigilante justice thing, and it's like just a great example of like actually like how America thinks that crime works.
Yeah. Jeff Bezos can do so much good, but and he's not doing vigilante justice. What he's doing is he's hiring lawyers to fucking take more money away from poor people. Sorry, Mikey, you've been trying to get into work.
No, it's all right. I was just gonna point out too, like the whole Dark Knight Rises trilogy, like Bane. There was a meme where Bane was like living ahead of his time, wearing a mask, freaking out about a dude wearing a bat suit, and then also stealing pretty much his stuff to give out to the regular.
Although I get the analogy, even though he wasn't really trying to give it out to the regular people. But yeah, Bane. You know what I don't like about Bane is that they took his Latin Americanness away. So like, I hate how invisible Latinos are. Like, we are so invisible that when we finally get characters and they finally make it to the big screen, they fucking strip them of their Latino-ness. Like, even though it's kind of problematic, but in the cartoons he always had this like Latino accent. I hate how they always do the like, the Latino. I can't even do it, but it's the Sofia Vergara accent. Anyway, we're on a completely different topic now.
That and the luchador costume. Ooh.
Socialism. Let's wrap it up. It's a system where the social surplus product, all of the wealth that is created by people, the extra wealth, is disseminated to the people themselves, and that's not kept by profiteers who are just going to put it in some fucking Wall Street, Cayman Islands account and like just hoard it, like literally. Like and it's not socialism, and this isn't a system that's trying to take any money away from people who are already working. It's not even about recovering our tax dollars. It's actually beyond, like, one, that's the first step. We have to recover our tax dollars. If we're paying taxes, we should be getting something back that benefits society, that improves society. Infrastructure, rail, green technologies, unemployment systems, UBI, community land trust money. There's all kinds of sort of suggestions that we have, right? That's one, recover our tax dollars. This is where, like, I think we can, like, sort of agree with some of the things that libertarians sort of, like, some, not all of the things that they want, right? The tax dollars, that's their big thing. Well, like, all right, let's recover that and make sure it helps people. The other thing is, like, the social surplus product, all the profit. Imagine if the billions of dollars that are made every year in profits actually just get put back into the society that we live in to make it better. Like, we could live in the future if we really wanted to, but we're fucking stuck living in this hellscape because we're trying to protect not even the CEOs, but the owners of Pfizer, Moderna, the owners of, Amazon, the owners of, all these giant corporations, just so they can keep their, their profit margins. And it's sad, and it's so antiquated, honestly. I feel a lot of depression sometimes because I feel like I don't live in the right time period. I feel like I'm living at a place, like, and I say these things and people think that I'm crazy. And it's like, dude, we can live in the future if we wanted to. Like, I remember a time growing up where all the movies that were coming out about the future were like all fucking awesome. And they necessitated public investment. Like, the Jetsons had fucking, and I technically, this is bad for health, but like they had escalators that walked them places. They got on the like the ones at the airports, but those were everywhere. They didn't have to walk anywhere. They just got on the thing and it took them wherever they wanted. That necessitates public investment. The reason we don't have these things is because, wealthy people don't want to pay taxes. Yeah, we have Black Mirror. I mean, if you pay attention to it, actually, I've been wanting to write an article about this, but like all of the films about the future in the last 20 years are all like, apocalyptic shit. Even though those existed in the 80s a little bit, like, Mad Max and whatnot, you had a rival sort of before neoliberalism. We didn't even get to talk about neoliberalism today, but before that sort of Reagan and Thatcherism started, the visions of the future in the 70s and 80s was like this beautiful fucking, like, amazing, like, super technological place that made life better for people. Now we have, like, and the thing is, it's sort of it's the irony of capitalism is that, like, we don't even have to imagine it because we are literally living in it. Like, thousands of people are going homeless. People are being evicted from their housing. And like in my place, there's like little shitty ass studios. Shitty ass studios are going for $1,400. Like the ugliest, fucking moldiest studios in the back of the building, like that right next to the trash, and you know what hangs out in trash, near trash. Rats hang out by the trash, like, and you're gonna pay $1,400 for like crappy studio. But we want to protect people's profits, so we need something better. And socialism is where we as a society basically just take care of each other, man. That's it. That's how I'm gonna leave it at that. Like, that's this. If you want a simple definition for socialism, is where we basically all sort of share responsibility and accountability, and we work to help each other out, man. And if anything, that's the Latin American in me. Like, in those communities, you take care of each other. Even out here, like, immigrant communities take care of each other. And just thinking about your community is not just being the brown people or the white people or the people immediately in your community, but, like, as human beings.
Okay, thank you everybody for watching this episode of Sembrando Ideales. Genesis, thank you to all my lovely co-hosts, Ali, Guillermo, Rebecca, Mikey, and Dr. Carlos.
Take care, everybody. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care, and we'll be dropping resources for everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.